Hey folks, welcome back. Thanks for sticking with us as we dive into the second part of our story. Let's get right into it. I love you too, Bob said, leaning in for a kiss. But she turned her head away sharply, her expression a mix of shock and embarrassment. Bob stepped back immediately, his face unreadable, and walked off without another word. He stayed quiet until he and Sophia had put some distance between themselves and the main house. As they walked, Bob couldn't ignore the presence of several heavily armed security guards lingering nearby. With Sophia's back to him, he took out his phone and discreetly opened the voice recording app. He noticed he somehow had 2 bars, barely enough signal to make a call, but better than nothing. Satisfied, he slipped the phone back into his pocket. "It's beautiful out here," Sophia said finally, breaking the awkward silence. "Yeah," Bob muttered, his tone indifferent. They stopped at a weathered wooden bench that overlooked a serene little pond. Sophia sat down first, and Bob followed suit. He turned toward her and asked, "What's going on here? You're a sharp guy, Bob. Why don't you figure it out?" She shot back with a knowing look. "I've got a hunch, but let's just say it's not a pleasant thought," Bob replied carefully. "How about you save me the trouble and just tell me?" "Fine. As you know, Olivia was chosen to be Daniel's next executive assistant," Sophia began. "Yeah, I already heard that. Olivia told me herself. But there's more to it, isn't there?" Bob pressed. "There is," Sophia admitted. "Bob, your life is about to take a big turn. Whether it's for better or worse depends on how you handle things. You do know Olivia loves you, right?" "She says she does," Bob replied, his voice edged with doubt. "But honestly, I'm finding that a little hard to believe right now." "Trust me, she loves you more than you realize," Sophia said firmly. "In fact, she's willing to do whatever it takes to secure a bright future for both of you. That's why she's making these sacrifices." Bob narrowed his eyes. "And by sacrifices you mean?" Sophia ignored his tone and continued. "You support your wife and her career, don't you?" "Of course I do. Always have," Bob said automatically. But inside, he felt uneasy, like the time years ago when he'd been crawling on his stomach, inch by inch, under the cover of a heat-dispersing cloak, hoping to avoid landmines in the pitch darkness. "Good," Sophia said with a satisfied nod. "Then you need to see this as just a brief hiccup. A small bump in the road to what's ultimately going to be a long, happy marriage." "A year or 2? Bob repeated, his voice rising. "Olivia said 6 months. Why are you saying 2 years? What's supposed to happen during that time?" He locked eyes with her. "And what's your role in all of this?" "I'll get to that," Sophia said coolly. "My role," Sophia said evenly, "is to prepare you for what's coming and make sure you understand, really understand, and embrace Daniel's expectations. For both you and your wife." Bob shot her a hard look, his patience wearing thin. "Why the hell should I care about Daniel's expectations of me? I don't answer to him, and last I checked, he doesn't sign my paychecks." "No, he doesn't," Sophia replied smoothly. "But he does sign Olivia's. And your cooperation, or lack of it, will have a direct impact on how easy or difficult her job will be." "Cooperation?" Bob snapped. "What the hell are you even talking about?" Sophia gave him a steady look, her expression annoyingly calm. "I'm sure you've noticed that Daniel is what most people would call an alpha male." She said it like she was pointing out that the sky was blue. Bob let out a bitter laugh. "Alpha male? More like a self-absorbed, narcissistic jackass." Sophia actually chuckled at that, the first genuine sound he'd heard from her, and the first moment where she seemed remotely human. "Let's just say he expects people to fall in line and do as they're told. That includes Olivia. And, by extension, you." Bob's jaw tightened as his mind raced. "So, let me get this straight, he wants to screw my wife, and I'm supposed to just sit here and play along? That's what you're telling me, isn't it?" His voice was low but edged with rising anger he was trying to hold in check. Sophia tilted her head slightly. "I wouldn't phrase it quite like that, but essentially, yes. And for what it's worth, they already have. Several times." Her words landed like a blow, and she didn't miss the flash of pain in Bob's eyes. His voice turned cold. And you know this how? I was there. I recorded it, Sophia said, her tone maddeningly casual, as if filming such things was the most normal thing in the world. You're joking, Bob said, his voice sharp with disbelief. Not at all, she replied, pulling out her phone. Here. Take a look. You might find it enlightening. Bob stared at her for a moment before reluctantly taking the phone. The screen displayed a short video of Olivia and Daniel together, their movements primal and unrestrained. Bob's stomach churned, but he kept his face neutral. Interesting, he muttered. Then, in a tone edged with irony, he added, Mind if I keep a copy? Not at all. I saved it just for you, Sophia said, handing him her phone. Bob connected via Bluetooth and saved the clip to his own device, already thinking of how useful it might be in divorce proceedings. Sophia broke the silence with a question. Tell me something, Bob. How's your love life been lately? Bob's eyes narrowed. Not that it's any of your damn business, but it's been practically dead for the last couple of months. Why do you ask? Oh, it is my business, Sophia said, her voice cool and deliberate. And the reason for that is simple. Daniel instructed Olivia to limit your intimacy, Sophia said, her tone clinical. He's very possessive of what he considers his property. Bob's face darkened. His property? He growled through clenched teeth. And she just went along with that? Of course she did, Sophia replied as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. He's her master now. She answers to him, just like all of his previous assistants have. And, in time, he'll expect you to do the same. Bob flinched at the word. Master, his anger surging. He can expect all he wants. He snapped, his voice cold and venomous. But he can expect in one hand and crap in the other. Let's see which one fills up first. Sophia's smirk didn't go unnoticed, and Bob had to fight the urge to wipe it off her face. So what does this jackass want from me? Money? Hardly, Sophia said, letting out a dry chuckle. What he expects is your obedience. Your submission. And tonight he'll want you to demonstrate it publicly in front of the other senior partners. Bob's brows knitted tightly together. What the hell does that mean? What does he expect me to do? Sophia's voice took on a measured, almost rehearsed tone. The dynamics of your marriage will shift significantly while Olivia holds her current position. To reflect that, Daniel has prepared documents for you to sign. These state that you willingly relinquish your marital rights, property, and assets to him for the duration of Olivia's tenure as his assistant. But that's not all. Tonight, after he's had his way with you, he'll expect you to kneel before him, in full view of your wife and the other executives, and perform oral sex on him. To completion. Bob's body tensed like a coiled spring, his jaw tightening as fury lit his eyes. You're insane, he growled. You seriously think I'd go along with this? Sophia's expression remained unreadable. I know it's hard to hear, but Olivia expects this of you as well. In fact, she's quite eager to watch. This act will signify that you've fully ceded any authority in your marriage to Daniel, for as long as he chooses to keep her. Bob's voice dropped to a dangerous, guttural tone. Let me get this straight. That bastard wants me to sign over everything I own, let him rape me, and then, what, suck him off in front of my wife and all of his colleagues. Are you out of your mind? I'm not joking, Bob, Sophia said without missing a beat. And yes, that is exactly what he wants. He'll also expect you to swallow. Both Daniel and Olivia are quite aligned on this. And naturally, the entire encounter will be recorded. Bob's eyes narrowed, his fury boiling beneath the surface. Of course. A video. Let me guess, so he can use it against me later? Extortion. Blackmail. That's what this is. You make it sound so crude, Sophia said with a faint shrug. But yes, it would serve as leverage. To keep you in line. After you've submitted to Daniel, Sophia continued, her voice as flat as ever, he'll take Olivia to bed. Tomorrow morning, they'll leave for New York City together, where they'll spend the weekend. Bob's eyes narrowed, his anger bubbling just beneath the surface. "And where will I be while they're having the time of their lives in New York?" "You'll stay here," Sophia replied matter-of-factly. "Confined to your room. You'll be provided meals and supervised at all times. When they return, you'll drive Olivia back home and follow her instructions to the letter. No questions, no deviations." Bob let out a short, bitter laugh. "So, let me get this straight. I'm supposed to let myself get literally screwed in the ass, forced to perform oral sex on this asshole, then be locked up like some kind of prisoner? And what exactly do I get out of this deal? If you cooperate with Daniel's program, you'll walk away relatively unscathed," Sophia said, unfazed by his fury. "There may be some minor humiliation, yes, but when Daniel is done with Olivia, you'll be compensated handsomely." Bob leaned forward, his voice cold and sharp. "So let me guess. You, Daniel, and my soon-to-be ex-wife all sat down and cooked up this plan together? To destroy my marriage, steal everything I've worked for, and oh yeah, literally screw me over. Do I have that about right?" Sophia hesitated only a moment before answering. "I wouldn't phrase it quite that way, but from your perspective, I suppose you could see it like that. Yes, we all collaborated on this." Bob's jaw tightened as he struggled to process the betrayal. And this is just standard operating procedure for him? Did he do the same thing to his other assistants and their husbands? "Yes," Sophia said simply. "And they actually went along with it? No pushback? No resistance?" "They did," Sophia confirmed. "In fact, most of the husbands enjoyed it more than they expected. What harm would it do? Olivia, for one, would love to see you please her master." Bob let out a scoff, his voice filled with venom. "I'm sure she'd love that. They can both kiss my ass and go to hell." He fixed Sophia with a hard stare. "And you can tell that bastard if he even tries to pull something like that on me, I'll make damn sure it's the last thing he ever does." Sophia remained calm, as though she'd heard similar threats before. "I understand you're angry, Bob, and you have every right to be. But in the end, you'd benefit from this arrangement in more ways than one." Bob's stomach churned, but he forced himself to remain composed. "There's more, isn't there?" he asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. "There is," Sophia admitted. "The agreement also requires you to get a vasectomy at your earliest convenience. Furthermore, you'll be expected to accept and take responsibility for any children Olivia and Daniel might produce. She plans to make a show of flushing her birth control pills once the documents are signed." Bob's hands clenched into fists at his sides. "And if I don't go along with this complete load of bullshit?" Sophia's tone darkened slightly, her words deliberate. "Let's just say you wouldn't like the consequences. A few tried to fight Daniel," Sophia said casually, though her words carried a dark weight. "They ended up penniless, branded as convicted sex offenders. Illegal videos, conveniently discovered on their devices, sealed their fate. And I'm sure you know what happens to sex offenders in prison. It's not a pleasant existence." Bob's eyes narrowed. "That sounds an awful lot like a threat." "Call it whatever you want," Sophia replied with a shrug, as though the matter was trivial. "All right," Bob said, his voice firm. "I will." He pulled his phone out of his pocket, and paused for a moment, saving the audio recording he'd been discreetly making. His fingers scrolled through his contacts until he found the name he was looking for. He glanced at the signal bars on the screen, still holding steady, and selected the number before pressing the phone to his ear. Sophia's expression darkened, her face flushing red with anger. "What are you doing?" she demanded. Bob smirked, holding a finger to his lips. "Shh," he whispered, motioning for her to stay quiet. After a few rings, a deep, steady voice answered. "Sheriff Jackson speaking." "Uncle William." "How's it going?" Bob asked, a small grin creeping onto his face. "Stone." "What's the word, son?" Bob replied, a touch of warmth in his tone. "Dad was right," Bob said. "I need an extraction. Fast. You got the address?" "I do," Bob confirmed. "You should also have the coordinates from my phone. Here's the situation. I've counted at least 15 heavily armed men on site. There's a gate at the main entrance, The code's 6973 unless they've changed it since last night. Daniel Hansen is here, along with 3 of his top executives and a trainer. She just gave me the full rundown. I've got it all recorded. Copy that, Bob said, his voice calm and professional. We're en route. ETA is about 5 minutes. Can you hold out until we get there? I think so, Bob replied confidently. As long as you're good with calling it self-defense. And thanks, Uncle William. Always, Bob said firmly. Wouldn't want anything to happen to my favorite nephew. What about Olivia? Bob asked, his voice tinged with disappointment. According to Hansen's trainer, she's fully on board with this. She's already playing his lapdog. He paused, his expression hardening. So we drop her. On the other end of the call, Uncle William sighed, the weight of Bob's words sinking in. I'm sorry to hear that, son, he said quietly. Yeah, Bob replied, his tone heavy with resignation. Me too. Well, hang tough, young man. We're almost there, Bob assured him before the line went dead. Bob lowered the phone, took a deep breath, and sent the audio file to his uncle. As the file uploaded, Sophia's trembling voice broke the silence. What did you just do? She asked, her earlier confidence replaced by wide-eyed fear. Who did you call? Bob's lips curved into a small, determined smile. I called in the cavalry, he said simply. Sophia shot up from the bench, panic etched across her face. I need to get back to the house. I have to warn the others, she stammered, her movements jittery and unfocused. Bob reached out, his hand firm but calm, and gently pulled her back down onto the bench. I think not, he said coolly. Sophia froze, her gaze locked on Bob's steely expression. It wasn't anger or rage, it was something far more chilling, calm, calculated control. His eyes carried the weight of a man who had seen and endured much worse. We're gonna sit right here and enjoy the sunshine for a bit, Bob continued, leaning back slightly. Might be the last sunshine you ever see. His smile grew, faint but undeniable, and it sent a shiver down Sophia's spine. Underscore 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 underscore. Meanwhile, near the large pool behind Daniel Hansen's mansion, he and his entourage lounged comfortably, smugly unaware of what was coming. Daniel leaned back in a chair, flanked by Olivia and his inner circle, the sun casting a glow on their relaxed postures. I think you've bitten off more than you can chew this time, Daniel, Ryan said, his tone measured as he sipped a cocktail. Daniel smirked, waving off the comment like it was a fly. Why? Because Olivia's little cuck is some ex-Marine. Big deal. He scoffed, gesturing toward his security detail. What's he gonna do? He's unarmed, outnumbered, and surrounded by more firepower than he's probably seen since boot camp. Ryan didn't share Daniel's confidence, his brow furrowing as he leaned forward. Just be careful, he warned. I've got a bad feeling about this one. Relax, Daniel said with a laugh, clapping him on the shoulder. I've got everything under control. Worst case? We spike his drinks tonight. Trust me, by the time we're done, he'll be practically begging to suck me off. I can't wait to see that. Olivia purred, leaning in close to Daniel, her laughter soft but tinged with cruelty. Are you gonna make him swallow, like the others? Of course, Daniel replied, his grin widening. By the time this weekend's over, your boy will be begging for more. Olivia giggled, her laughter echoing against the pool's edge. Ryan shook his head, his unease evident. Just don't underestimate him, he cautioned again. This guy's not like the others. The others were weak. He's not. Daniel rolled his eyes, leaning back in his chair. They're all the same, Ryan. You're getting worked up over nothing. No, they're not, Ryan insisted. This guy is a combat marine, trained to kill. You need to be ready for anything. Settle down. Daniel snapped, his tone sharp. I've got this under control. He turned his attention back to Olivia, a curious look crossing his face. But I am wondering about something. Why didn't you know your husband was a Marine? Olivia hesitated for a moment before shrugging. It's like Bob said. Olivia Nice gave a small shrug, her voice defensive. He never told me any details. All he said was that he was in the military. Daniel smirked, brushing off the concern. Doesn't matter. He's going down. Tonight. And once he's out of the picture, your career is gonna skyrocket. Olivia's brow furrowed, doubt creeping into her voice. What if he files for divorce? What if this blows back on me? Daniel chuckled darkly, leaning back with an air of complete confidence. Then I'll ruin him, just like I did the others. He'll end up behind bars for sexual assault or worse. Trust me, dear, I'll take care of everything. Before Olivia could respond, Glenn suddenly sat up straighter, his head tilting slightly. What's that sound? He asked, glancing around. The group froze, the faint but unmistakable thrum of helicopter blades growing louder by the second. The relaxed atmosphere shattered as one of Daniel's security men came sprinting toward the pool, his face pale and drenched with sweat. Mr. Hanson, we've got a problem. The man panted, gripping the edge of the table to steady himself. What kind of problem? Daniel asked sharply, rising from his chair. The answer came not from the guard, but from the cacophony of shouting and the sound of a scuffle nearby. Suddenly, 2 uniformed deputies in body armor appeared, rifles raised and movements swift. Freeze! One of the deputies barked, his commanding voice cutting through the tension like a knife. Drop your weapon! He ordered the security man, who complied instantly, his hands shooting up in surrender. Within seconds, more deputies swarmed the area, their efficiency leaving no room for resistance. Daniel, Olivia, and the other 3 executives were swiftly handcuffed, their protests and threats falling on deaf ears. What's going on here? Daniel roared, his face a mask of outrage. Do you have any idea who I am? I'll have your badges for this. Quiet, one of the deputies snapped, his voice firm. You're all under arrest. He proceeded to list an extensive array of charges, ranging from blackmail and conspiracy to unlawful surveillance. The final blow came as he read their Miranda rights, sealing their fates. As they were led around the side of the building, the group was met with a stunning sight. 4 helicopters, a bus, and several large vans filled the grounds, officers moving with precision. Disarmed security guards were being loaded onto the bus, their weapons confiscated. Olivia's gaze darted wildly until it landed on Bob, who stood calmly beside a tall, imposing man in a khaki sheriff's uniform. Bob! She cried, her voice trembling with desperation. What's going on? Bob's expression was cold and unyielding as he turned to the uniformed man. Together they walked toward her, and the closer they came, the more Olivia's fear mounted. Bob stopped a few feet away, arms crossed. His voice was calm but laced with an unmistakable edge. Your little party is over, Olivia. Olivia's face crumpled as she tried to process what was happening. Bob, please. This is all a big misunderstanding, she stammered. You have to believe me. Bob raised an eyebrow, his lips curving into a humorless smirk. Oh, where are my manners? He said, gesturing to the tall man beside him. Olivia, let me introduce Sheriff William Jackson. You remember my Uncle William, don't you? Olivia's face turned ghostly pale. Uncle William, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I didn't know you were a sheriff. Bob's grin was sharp, almost predatory. I guess it just slipped my mind, he replied dryly. Bob, listen to me. Olivia pleaded, her voice cracking. Please. You have to believe me. This isn't what it looks like. Bob's eyes, once warm and kind, were now filled with a steely resolve. No, Olivia, he said firmly. I don't have to believe you. In fact, I don't think I've ever been more shocked and disgusted in my entire life. Olivia's tears began to fall freely. Bob, please. He cut her off, his tone final and ice cold. Save it. First thing tomorrow, I'm visiting my attorney to have divorce papers drawn up. And as of right now, He leaned in slightly, his gaze unflinching. You're dead to me. Do you understand that, Olivia? Dead. Olivia collapsed into sobs as the deputies escorted her and the others away. Bob watched silently, his jaw tight, before turning back to his uncle. Thanks for coming, Uncle William, he said quietly. Always, son, Bob replied, resting a reassuring hand on Bob's shoulder. As the helicopters began to lift off, Bob stood in the clearing sunlight, the weight of the past days lifting from his chest, one betrayal at a time. With a steady hand, Bob grabbed Olivia's left hand and slipped her rings off her trembling fingers. He pocketed them without a second glance. You son of a bitch! Daniel snarled, thrashing against the two deputies who were holding him securely. I'll be out of jail in no time, and when I am, I'll kill you. You hear me, you piece of shit? Bob tilted his head, a smirk creeping across his face. That sure sounded like a threat. What do you think, Uncle William? Sheriff Jackson chuckled, his voice as dry as the desert air. Sure did, son. We'll add that to the long list of charges he's already facing. Should help make sure he doesn't get bail. Don't worry, Mr. Hanson. Bob leaned in closer to Daniel, his grin sharp. My boys will take real good care of you, and your friends. Daniel's face turned a shade of crimson that bordered on dangerous, but his rage was futile. Get these people out of here, Bob ordered, motioning to his deputies. With swift efficiency, the deputies escorted Daniel, Olivia, and the other detainees to the waiting bus. Bob watched in silence, his emotions a storm beneath his calm exterior. The life he thought he had, the love he thought was real, was gone, shattered like glass underfoot. Bob placed a firm hand on Bob's shoulder, breaking the silence. It'll get better, son. Trust me on that. Bob nodded slowly, appreciating the comfort. Bob had been through a divorce of his own years ago, a painful separation from a cheating spouse, and Bob knew his uncle spoke from experience. Thanks, Uncle William, Bob said, his voice steady but laced with exhaustion. For everything. You're welcome, son. If you need anything, you call me. And tell your dad I said hello. I have a feeling he's got a bottle of his best whiskey waiting for you. Bob gave a faint smile. I will. Is it safe to grab my things? I need to get the hell out of here. Bob nodded. Yeah, I think the team's just about done clearing the place. Go ahead. After a quick goodbye, Bob packed his belongings in silence and left the nightmare behind him. 1 week later, after spending time at his father's house, commiserating over drinks and hard truths, Bob visited the family attorney. The prenuptial agreement they had signed before the marriage made things simple. Everything would revert to him, and Olivia would walk away with nothing. Divorce papers were prepared and delivered promptly. Now, sitting across from Olivia in the county jail's visitation room, Bob stared at the woman he once thought he'd spend his life with. She looked smaller somehow, her once proud demeanor replaced by quiet resignation. This will be the one and only time I visit you, Olivia, Bob said, his voice cold but calm. I just wanted to make sure you received the papers. Olivia nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. I got them. I've already signed them and sent them back. Bob's gaze didn't soften. Good. For a moment, silence stretched between them. Bob didn't feel anger anymore, just a hollow, aching disappointment. He stood abruptly, pushing his chair back. Take care, Olivia, he said flatly. Without waiting for a response, he walked out, leaving her behind for good. For Bob, it was the first real step toward reclaiming his life. As I'm sure you've figured out, I stuck to the prenuptial agreement. I'll deal with your stuff after your trial. I appreciate that, Olivia said, her voice soft. There's something I don't get though, Bob continued. How did you know? You'll hear all the details in court, he replied. But here's the short version. I had a suspicion for a couple of months before that weekend, but I couldn't prove anything. About 4 months before Memorial Day, the estranged husband of one of Daniel's so-called assistants came to my dad with a crazy story. He brought along spreadsheets and documents, claiming they were from his wife, who'd gotten them off Daniel's system. My dad had me go through them to see if I could find anything useful. Of course, I couldn't tell you anything, conflict of interest and privilege and all that. But it took a while. We eventually found something solid. Evidence of shady financial deals with some seriously unsavory characters. Your lover did a good job covering his tracks, but not well enough. A couple of weeks before that weekend, Dad turned everything over to the feds. They were already looking into Hanson's business, and they were planning to raid your offices in June. My dad warned me to be careful that weekend. He even got information from his contact, which was hard for him to believe at the time. We also spoke to my Uncle William, the county sheriff where Daniel's property is. I hoped everything would stay calm, but that wasn't how it went down. Sophia Carson told me what you and Daniel had planned, and I recorded the conversation. Lucky for me, we live in a state where only one party's permission is needed for a recording. Bob leaned forward, his eyes steady. I do have a few questions, though. What do you want to know? Olivia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. How long before that weekend were you seeing your so-called master? He asked, his tone serious. About 2 months, Olivia answered without hesitation. Bob was taken aback by her candor. That's about when things started to go south between us, huh? Yes, she murmured, her face turning red. Bob let out a long sigh. I guess I'll need to get tested for STDs then. Olivia's face turned an even deeper shade of red. The weight of her silence said it all. Did you really want to see me suffer? Bob's voice was tight with anger. Olivia looked down, refusing to meet his gaze. Well? He pressed, his frustration mounting. She finally looked up, tears in her eyes. Yes, she admitted quietly. But you have to understand, I never wanted any of this. I didn't willingly agree to any of it. Then why? Bob demanded, the hurt evident in his tone. Because I was manipulated, she confessed. Daniel had a way of controlling me, and I was so caught up in his power that I went along with whatever he wanted. If I didn't, he had ways of making sure I did. Bob's eyes narrowed. What do you mean? How far did he take this? He had something planned, something that could have hurt me badly if I didn't comply. He made sure I knew that, Olivia said, trembling. Bob was quiet for a moment, taking in the gravity of her words. So you were a part of this, against me? Olivia looked at him, her face pale. No, I never wanted to hurt you, Bob, she sobbed. I was caught in something I couldn't get out of. The evidence says otherwise, Olivia, Bob replied, his voice hard. Not only did you betray me, you played a part in betraying me in ways I never imagined. Olivia wiped her tears away, but still didn't speak. Bob took a deep breath. So, there's no chance for us? He asked, his voice raw with emotion. No, Bob, she whispered. There's no going back from this. Then that's it, Bob said, his voice final. I've wasted enough time on this. Goodbye, Olivia. I hope you find the peace you're looking for. He turned to leave, not looking back, as Olivia's sobs filled the silence. After several court appearances, Olivia, Daniel, Sophia, and the others were found guilty of all the charges leveled against them. As the leader of the illegal operation, Daniel received a life sentence in federal prison, with no possibility of parole. The 3 executives, who had played smaller roles in Daniel's financial schemes, were sentenced to 20 years. Sophia and Olivia, despite their involvement, received somewhat lighter sentences due to their cooperation. Several other employees at the firm were also charged for their roles in the conspiracy, though a few turned state's evidence against Daniel in exchange for immunity. By the time the legal battles ended, the Remington Law Group was no more. Bob's divorce from Olivia was finalized quickly and without complications. Given Olivia's prison sentence, Bob packed up all of her belongings and placed them in storage for her parents to collect when they were ready. On July 4th, Bob, his father, and Bob celebrated Independence Day like many others in the country, with a barbecue and fireworks. Bob brought a guest to the gathering and introduced her to Bob. She was an attractive brunette with striking brown eyes, and Bob couldn't help but admire her, especially when he noticed her athletic build. She wore a pair of denim cutoffs that accentuated her well-toned legs. Son, this is Rachel Parker. She just moved here from Dallas and started working with me a couple of weeks ago, Bob introduced her. You're a deputy? Bob asked, intrigued. Sure am, Marcia replied with a confident smile. She's also a former Marine, like your dad, Bob added. Marcia served as an MP, just like your father did. Bob nodded. Semper Fi, he said with a grin. Semper Fi, Marcia replied warmly. I think we're gonna get along just fine. Bob smiled. I think so too. How about buying a girl a beer? Marcia asked. Sure, Bob responded. I could use a fresh one myself. He grabbed 2 beers from the cooler and handed one to her. As they sat down, Marcia spoke again. Your uncle told me about your last op. Sounds like it went off without a hitch. Bob nodded, a faint smile on his face. Yeah, well, it wasn't all bad, but I guess it happens sometimes. Marcia gave him a sympathetic look. I'm sorry about what you went through with your ex. Thanks, Bob said quietly. I guess you just learned to move on. The divorce will be final soon. How about you? I noticed the mark on your ring finger. Were you married as well? Bob asked. I was, Marcia replied. My husband wasn't, if you know what I mean. I came home early one night and found him in bed with his secretary. In my bed, no less. Bob nodded sympathetically. I'm sorry to hear that. If you asked me, he was an idiot and a fool. Marcia chuckled. I agree. I'm just glad we didn't have any children. Do you have kids? No, thankfully. We were talking about starting a family, but things went south pretty quickly, Bob answered. They spent the rest of the evening talking and enjoying each other's company, with Bob and Bob's father setting off fireworks. By the end of the night, Bob felt much better. He believed he had met someone who understood him and enjoyed the same light-hearted energy. Are you about ready to head back, Marcia? Bob asked after the fireworks had ended. I guess it's about that time, Marcia said, then turned to Bob. I had a wonderful time tonight. It was a real pleasure meeting you. I had a wonderful time too, Marcia. I'm really glad we met, Bob said with a smile. I'd like to see you again, if that's okay. That would be more than okay, Marcia said with a broad smile. Here's my number, she added, handing him a card. Your uncle keeps me busy, but I'm usually off Saturday nights. Give me a call. I will, for sure, Bob replied, smiling back at her. He noticed the wink from his uncle, who seemed pleased with the interaction. I'll call you Thursday, Bob said. Talk to you then, Marcia replied before giving him a quick kiss on the cheek. They said their goodbyes, and she left with Bob. Nice-looking young lady, Bob's father said after they had gone. Yes, very nice, Bob agreed with a wide grin. I hope you intend to keep your promise to her, his father added. Absolutely, Bob replied. Good man, his father said with a slap on the back. Come on, help me clean up, and let's see if we can polish off the rest of that beer. You gonna give me the day off tomorrow to sleep it off? Bob asked, laughing. Hell no, his father replied with a laugh of his own. Bob joined his father, his mind drifting back to the sweet brunette with the sparkling smile, and the fun evening they had shared. It seemed like the start of something good.